There is a feeling that most people never talk about. It is not sadness exactly. It is not fear. It is something quieter than both of those things. It is the feeling you get when you are watching the world fall apart, slowly, then all at once. And somewhere deep in your chest, something whispers, "This cannot be how the story ends." You have felt that. Maybe you felt it this morning. Maybe you felt it scrolling through the news at midnight when the house was quiet and you could not sleep. Maybe you felt it watching someone you love suffer something they did not deserve, and you looked up, not at the ceiling, but past it, and you asked the question that the most honest part of you has been asking for a long time now. Is any of this part of a plan, or are we just here? I want to talk to you about something today, something that I will be honest with you, I hesitated to make a video about. Because what I found when I started digging into this is not the version of the story most people tell. It is not polished. It is not comfortable. And there is one moment in particular, a single scene that most preachers skip right over, where Jesus says something so raw, so unguarded, so utterly human, that when I first really heard it, I had to put my Bible down and just sit there. I will show you that moment, I promise. But to understand why it hits so hard, I need to show you something else first, because there is a word, one single word, that Jesus uses in his description of the final hours before the rapture. A word that is buried so quietly in the original Greek that most English translations soften it into something that sounds almost gentle, but it is not gentle. It is one of the most desperate words in the entire New Testament. And Jesus put it there on purpose. I will show you exactly what that word is. But not yet. Stay with me. Because what we are about to walk into together, this changes things. Let me take you somewhere. The year is approximately 33 AD. It is late at night. The city of Jerusalem is still and dark, but not peaceful. There is the kind of tension in the air that you feel before a storm, where your skin knows something before your mind does. And Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives. He is not preaching to a crowd right now. He is not healing someone. He is sitting with four of his closest friends, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, and they have just walked away from the temple. And Peter, a few minutes ago, made a comment about how beautiful the temple buildings are, how massive the stones are, impressive, even overwhelming. And Jesus said something that stopped them all cold. He said, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another. Every one of them will be thrown down." That is not poetry. That is not metaphor. That is a man sitting on a hillside looking back at the most sacred structure in the world and telling four people who trusted him completely that it is going to be destroyed. So they ask him privately, just these four men on a hillside in the dark, "When will this happen? And what will be the sign when all these things are about to be fulfilled?" And here is what is so important about that moment that I do not want you to rush past it. They are not asking him an academic question. They are not doing theological research. These are men who have given up everything, their boats, their livelihoods, their families in some cases, to follow this person. And now he is sitting there telling them that the thing they thought was permanent is going to be rubble. They are scared. They want to know when, not because they are curious, because they need to know. Because if the temple falls, what happens to Jerusalem? What happens to Israel? What happens to us? And Jesus does something extraordinary in his answer. He does not just answer their question. He pulls back a curtain that I believe was never meant to be fully seen from where we are standing. He begins to describe, in very specific, very human, very present tense language, what the final hours before the end of this age are going to feel like, not look like, feel like. And this is the part that most people miss, because we have heard the prophecies. We have heard about wars and rumors of wars, about earthquakes and famines, about the stars falling from the sky. We turn those things into headlines, into charts, into end times timelines. But Jesus is not giving them a chart. He is giving them an experience. He is describing what it is going to feel like to be alive in the days before everything changes. And when I actually read it that way, not as a prophecy list, but as a description of a feeling, something in my chest just cracked open. Because the feeling he describes, I have felt it, and I think you have too. But here is what nobody tells you about what comes next in this passage. There is a detail right in the middle of his answer that most people read right past. It is actually the most important sentence he says in the entire discourse, and it is the sentence that will reframe everything else he tells them. I'm going to show it to you, but first, I need you to understand something about the people he was talking to, because it changes everything about what he was saying. Think about what it means to be one of these four disciples. You have been walking with Jesus for 3 years. You have seen things that have no natural explanation. You have watched a dead man walk out of a tomb. You have seen a storm stop mid-sentence because a man told it to. You have watched 5,000 people eat from what was essentially a child's lunchbox, and you helped collect 12 baskets of leftovers afterward. You have seen things. And yet, and this is the part that quietly breaks my heart, even after all of that, you are still sitting here on a hillside at night, asking when, still asking for a timeline, still trying to locate yourself on a calendar, because faith, no matter how deep it goes, has this very human tendency to want to know what comes next. Jesus knows this about them. He loves this about them. And so he answers. He says, when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Now, before you file that under things you have already heard, I want to stop at one word, alarmed. In the original Greek, the word there is throio, and throio does not mean scared. It does not mean worried. It means something closer to crying out in a state of agitated terror. It is the word you would use for the sound a crowd makes when something catastrophic happens without warning. It is visceral. It is involuntary. It is the sound of people who have completely lost their footing. And Jesus looks at his disciples, 4 men who have just been told the temple is going to fall, and he says, when you hear things that make the whole world cry out in agitated terror, do not be that sound. That is not a small ask, because the world he is describing, listen to this, because this is where the curtain starts to pull back. The world he is describing is one where the instinct toward panic is completely rational, where the news coming in would make any reasonable person's nervous system flood, where the things happening around you would seem to offer zero evidence that anything is under control. And into that world, into that exact world, he speaks these words. But here is the complication, and this is the part I need you to stay with me for, because this is where most teachers skip ahead too fast. If Jesus is telling them not to be alarmed, then he is acknowledging that there is something genuinely alarming coming. He is not saying, don't worry, it won't be that bad. He is not minimizing what is coming. He is not offering them a spiritual anesthetic. He is saying, I know what is coming, and it is as hard as you fear it will be, and I am asking you in the middle of that to not be what the fear wants to make you. That is a completely different message than the one we usually hear, and it raises a question that I want to plant in your mind right now, because I am not going to answer it yet, but I need you to carry it. If he knew it would be this hard, why did he allow it? Why not just stop it? Why not just come back before any of the alarming things start? Why let his people walk through the very thing he is describing? The wars, the shaking, the disorientation, the feeling that everything you thought was permanent is falling. I will come back to that question. But right now, I need to show you something deeper in this text, because as Jesus keeps going, he describes something that is not on most end times prophecy charts. And it is the detail that when I finally saw it, I understood why he was saying everything else that he was saying. He says, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. Now, we often skip this one because it sounds extreme, almost theatrical, like the kind of thing you put on a chart between false prophets and the abomination of desolation. But sit in it for a second. He is not talking about armies. He is not talking about nations. He is talking about families. He is talking about the table you grew up sitting at. He is talking about the person who knows your voice before you say your name. He is talking about the most fundamental human structure, the bond between parent and child, between siblings, and he is saying, in the days before everything changes, even that will be under siege. The loneliness he is describing here is not the loneliness of being without people. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people who no longer feel like home. And I genuinely wonder, how many people watching this right now already know exactly what that feels like. Because if you do, there is a line coming in just a few minutes, a line that I have never heard preached on, that Jesus says right in the middle of all of this, that I believe he placed there specifically for the people who feel that kind of alone. I am going to show it to you, but first, we need to go somewhere darker. I want to be honest with you about something. When I first started researching this, when I started actually reading Matthew 24 and Mark 13 the way they were meant to be read, slowly in context as a conversation between a teacher and four terrified friends, I had to stop and ask myself a really uncomfortable question. Why does this not feel like comfort? Because when you read it straight through, without the charts and the eschatology frameworks and the end times terminology that we have layered over it across centuries, it is hard. It is the kind of thing that Jesus says, and you think, I almost wish I did not know this, because knowing it means carrying it. And carrying it means living with an awareness that most people around you do not share. Jesus says, you will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. He is telling them, you will be handed over to people with power over your body, over your freedom, over whether you live or die. And the reason you will be handed over is not because you did something wrong. It is because you belong to me. And then he says something so unexpected right in the middle of this passage that is full of warnings and darkness that it almost feels like it belongs in a different conversation. He says, whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand about what you will say. Just say whatever is given you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. Do not worry beforehand about what you will say. I have read that line 100 times, and I have always moved past it toward the more dramatic parts of the passage. But recently, I could not stop there. Because the situation he is describing is this: you are arrested. You are standing in front of someone who has the power to end your life, and your defense depends entirely on words that you do not yet have. And he's saying, do not prepare a script. Now, and I need to tell you that this is not irresponsible advice. Jesus is not telling them to be passive. He's telling them something about the nature of the Spirit that most of us have not fully received yet. He's telling them that the Holy Spirit operates in real time, not in advance, not in the calm of your living room when you have time to think things through, not when you have rehearsed all the angles. The Spirit shows up in the moment of the most terrifying thing you have ever faced. And here is what is so profound about that, and also so difficult, because the implication is that in order to experience that kind of Spirit-given provision, you have to walk into the terrifying thing first. You have to let the arrest happen. You have to let the trial begin. You have to let the worst-case scenario knock on the door, and then trust that when you open it, you will not be alone. That is not the message we usually want. We want the escape route. We want the way out that sidesteps the hard thing entirely. And here is Jesus, the person who loves these men more than any of us can fully comprehend. And he is not offering them an escape route. He is offering them a presence. But wait, because here is the part of this passage that changed something in me, the part I told you about at the beginning, the desperate word, the word that most English translations soften beyond recognition. Jesus continues, and he describes what it is going to feel like when all of this is reaching its peak. He says, in the original language, something that gets translated in most Bibles as men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world. Fainting from fear. That sounds almost delicate in English, almost Victorian. You picture someone in a drawing room needing smelling salts. But the Greek word there is apopsycho, and apopsycho means something far more visceral than fainting. It means, literally, the soul leaving the body from terror. It is the word for a person whose entire internal being has been evacuated by what they are experiencing. It is the word for someone who has had everything knocked out of them and is standing upright but no longer inside themselves. Jesus used that word on purpose. He is not describing mild anxiety. He is not describing a rough news cycle. He is describing the spiritual and psychological condition of people who have seen so much for so long, so many things that should not have happened happening, that the very center of their personhood has gone somewhere else to survive. And he is describing that, and then he does something that I have been saving for this moment. Something I have never heard in a sermon. Something that I believe he placed in this passage like a note under a door, written specifically for the people who would read this chapter feeling exactly like what he just described. And what I'm about to show you is the piece that makes everything else make sense. Right in the middle of all of this, between the description of wars and betrayal and cosmic signs and soul-evacuating fear, Jesus says this, "Now when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near." Read that again. Straighten up. Raise your heads. I want to stay in this sentence for a moment, because I think if we rush past it, the way we rush past most familiar things, we will miss what is actually happening here. Jesus has just described, in significant specific sensory detail, the most terrifying conditions that human beings will ever experience. He has named the loneliness, the betrayal, the physical danger, the cosmic disorientation, the psychological fracturing. He has described it all. He did not minimize 1 inch of it. And then he says, straighten up. That phrase, in Greek anakapto, is a physical instruction. It means to unbend, to pull yourself upright from the posture you are in. And the posture you are in, when you have to be told to straighten up, is bent over, crushed under the weight of it. You know that posture. You know what it feels like in your own body. When the season has been so long, when the news has been so consistently dark, when the personal losses have compounded to the point where your spirit just bends. Jesus sees that posture. He does not pretend it is not there. He does not tell you to smile through it. He sees the bent posture, the one that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. And he says, unbend, come up. And the reason he gives, and this is the one I promised you, the one I have been building toward since the first minute of this, is because your redemption is drawing near, not coming eventually, not promised for some uncertain future, drawing near. The Greek word is engizo, to come close, to be in proximity, to be arriving. He is describing the most terrifying, world-shaking, soul-evacuating season that human beings will ever live through. And he is saying, in the middle of that specific thing, not something easier, not something cleaned up, that is where I am closest. The darkness is not a sign of his distance. The darkness is a sign of his arrival. And now I can answer the question I planted in your mind almost 20 minutes ago. Why does he allow it? If he knew how hard it would be, if he could see the apopsycho, the soul evacuating terror, why not just stop it? Why not come back before any of it gets that dark? Because he has to wait until the people who would have been left behind have had every possible chance to raise their heads. Every chance, every open door, every moment of, I cannot explain this, but something in me knows there is more. He is waiting for those people, the ones who are right now, tonight, in this exact moment, feeling the exact thing he described. Bent over, soul evacuated, holding too much for too long. He is not prolonging the darkness because he is indifferent. He is prolonging the approach because he is thorough in his love, because he would rather his people endure one more season of difficulty than miss one single person who was this close to lifting their head. That is the God we are talking about. Not a distant clockmaker, not a detached sovereign watching events unfold from a safe remove. A God who looks at the most harrowing description of end times conditions and plants the word near in the middle of it, like a note under a door, like a whisper into the room that says, I know, I see, and I am closer than you think. And here is the part that just undoes me every time I come back to it. The disciples asked him, when will this be? And his answer, when you strip away all the layers, when you take away the prophecy frameworks and the charts and the denominational debates about exactly when the rapture happens, his answer is essentially this: you will know it is close when everything in you wants to look down. And that is exactly when you must look up. That is not a contradiction. That is a compass. He is giving us a directional instrument for the most disorienting season in human history, when everything in the world is telling you to collapse inward, to protect yourself, to look down at the ground to make sure it is still there. That is the signal. That is the moment he is saying to lift your head, because your redemption is not coming in spite of what you are walking through. It is coming through it. It is drawing near in it. He is arriving inside the very thing that made you bend. And I have to tell you, sitting with this passage, really sitting with it over these last few weeks of preparation, something shifted in me that I can only describe as a kind of internal unbending. Like something in my spirit that had been quietly braced against the world started to let go, not because the world got less dark, the world did not get less dark, but because the darkness stopped feeling like evidence of his absence and started feeling like evidence of his imminent arrival. And that changes everything. I want to pause here, not as a narrator, not as someone who spent weeks putting this together, just as a person who has sat in the same kind of quiet you might be sitting in right now, the kind of quiet where the world is loud and busy, and yet there is something in you that feels profoundly, specifically alone in a way you cannot fully explain to the people around you. Where you are watching things, in your country, in your family, in your own chest, that feel like they are building towards something, and you do not have the language for what that something is. I want to ask you something. What has God brought you through that you still do not fully understand? Not the things that got resolved neatly, not the testimonies that have a clean ending. I mean the ones that are still open, the seasons that hurt in ways you have never fully processed, the prayers that you still do not have an answer for, the losses that remade you in ways you are still discovering. Will you write it below? Not for me, but because someone is going to read your comment tonight at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. or some hour when sleep does not come. And they are going to feel, for the first time in a long time, that they are not the only one holding what they are holding. Your words might be the thing that reminds someone that bent is not broken, that soul evacuated is not soul abandoned. Write it, whatever it is, even if it is just a few words, write it. And now I want to bring this home because there is something I want you to leave with today that is not a theology and not a timeline. Jesus pulled back this curtain. He sat on a hillside with 4 terrified friends in the dark, and he described in visceral detail the most difficult conditions human beings would ever face, not to scare them, not to give them a list of things to watch for so they could update their prophecy charts. He did it because he needed them. He needs us to know that the difficulty is not a surprise to him, not one breath of it. The wars, the betrayal, the cosmic shaking, the political instability, the family fractures, the soul evacuating terror. He named every single one, not from a distance, not clinically, with the kind of specificity that comes from someone who has been inside time and sees all of it simultaneously and still chose to say, straighten up, raise your heads, I'm near. He is not asking you to pretend the hard things are not hard. He is asking you to let the hard things be the sign that points you toward him rather than the evidence that he has abandoned you. And I think about those 4 men on the hillside, what it must have felt like to hear all of that in the dark, to go home that night carrying the weight of what he told them, to lie awake wondering, are we going to be okay? And I think they did not fully understand in that moment what they had just received. They had just received the most intimate, detailed, honest description of where history was heading, not to terrify them, but to prepare them, so that when it started happening, they would not be disoriented. So that when the world began to cry out in throe, that agitated, involuntary terror, they would be the people who could stand in the middle of it and say, I know this place. I was told about this. And I know what it means. It means he is near. That is what you are carrying out of this today. Not a chart, not a timeline, not a new set of things to watch for so you can calculate the countdown. A compass. When everything in you wants to bend, when the weight of the world, the weight of your own story, the weight of the season you are in makes you want to look down to make sure the ground is still there. That is the signal. That is him tapping on your shoulder, asking you to unbend, to straighten up, to raise your head, because your redemption, yours, not a generic theological concept, not an abstract eschatological event, but your specific, personal, long-awaited redemption is drawing near, in Gizo, arriving, in proximity, coming close. And the darkness is not the end of the story. The darkness is the last few steps of the journey, and he is walking it with you. Pause, breathe, let it land. If this video meant something to you today, if something in you shifted, even slightly, share it with someone who needs it tonight. You do not have to explain why. You do not have to write a theology dissertation. Just send it, because sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone we love is say, "Here, this is for you. I love you. I genuinely do, and I will see you in the next one."